G'day and welcome to the Campfire Project. And I'm here today with Zen Benefiel, who at the tender age of 18 experienced a profound near-death experience that became the gateway to a lifetime of profound transformation and exploration. During this remarkable event, Zen found himself on the threshold between life and death, experiencing a profound shift in consciousness and an intimate connection with the divine. Welcome to the Campfire Project, Zen.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'm just very pleased and honored to be here.
Well, thank you for coming along, because you sent me, that's only just a brief touch on an introduction to you, and the information you sent me, if I went through it all, we'd be here for quite some time. But what I really want to do...
We'd never get a chance to talk now, would we?
Exactly. So what I really want to do is have that opportunity to hear from yourself, your story of what you're doing today. But let's start with where it all began with for you, and what brought you through to where you are today.
Thank you for the opportunity. My life had a very interesting beginning. I was orphaned at birth, and I was adopted 6 weeks later, not knowing, the kinds of emotional things that happened during that time that young. And then at 4.5, my adopted sister arrives, and my parents decide to tell me, oh, and here's what happened. And you were adopted, and I never questioned the love or admiration or any of those kinds of things. However, it did get me to questioning, the whys, and there's a slew of those. But it led me to a question of, do I have a father and mother in heaven, and can I talk to them? And for a 4.5-year-old, that's probably, way on the edge of standard deviations. And yet I did. And a few months later, I'm standing in front of a window at night with my elbows in the windowsill, my chin on my hands, looking out over the front porch, waiting for Dad to come home with ice cream. It was after dark. And I hear this voice, and it just booming, "Hey, you." And I spun around, didn't try to talk to it then, but I spun around and asked my mom if she heard it. And she was only 15 feet away. It was so loud, I knew she would have heard it, right? No. She said, I didn't hear any voice, must have been a peeping Tom. And at that point, I realized, oh, that's just inside of me then. And it's okay. I was, that was my experience. I wasn't going to deny it just because she didn't hear it. Well, I developed a way to communicate with the voice over time. I would stand in front of the windows at night, sending that same voice out telepathically, and I would wait for it to return. I'd be in the house, it'd be night, the lights would be on, so I couldn't see outside, so there was that initial fear of the unknown of what's coming, right? And then it was when I finally shut up inside my head that I could listen, and the voice returned. Now, people practice meditations for decades to be able to do that. And I didn't realize it at the time, right? And not until later, much later. And so I developed this conversation. And at 18, I was in college. I was in a pre-med program. I had tested out of 6 quarters through the CLEP tests, which are college level examination program. So I started school as a 6-quarter freshman. Coming back from the first quarter, I just had this, I was distraught. And I didn't know if this was really what I wanted to do. I'd gone back to ask a high school girlfriend to marry me. I'd broken up with her before school and not wanting to suffer my integrity or harm her. And she was already married in 9 weeks. So it was just, you can imagine how your heart would get ripped out like that, especially as a teenager. So I went back to school, hit my knees, and I prayed. And I said, Father, I want to know what truth is. I'm willing to die for it if necessary. Well, the following, be careful what you ask for, right? Yeah. The following Tuesday afternoon, I came back from class, and it was 11/11/1975. I put on, did the, normal between school and studies time. I put an album on to meditate and just listen to music for a little bit. So I was laying across my dorm room bed, listening to Journey's first album. And in between the vocals and the vamp on the second song, this voice I was familiar with called me by name, and my given name's Bruce, by the way. I found out at 61 that my birth mother would have also named me Bruce. So that was a very interesting synchronicity. So the voice says, Bruce, are you willing to die for what you believe in? And I paused for a moment, kind of tensed up. It's like, oh, what do I believe in? Christ consciousness came up first. It felt a little empty, didn't question it, moved on. Cosmic consciousness came up the second time. And I thought, wow, this feels full. Yes. And at that point, I get a tug from my solar plexus and I pop out of my body in synchrony with a guitar riff on the album that sounds like a rocket ship taking off. I mean, perfect setup. And I turn around, I look at my body laying across my dorm room bed, turn back to look where I'm going, and I'm immediately engulfed by white light. And it feels like home in every stretch of imagination. And then I realized that it had a high-pitched, effervescent, iridescent sensation to it. At that point, I realized, oh, I'm thinking. I can't be dead. Woohoo! Right? And then the impetuous teenager comes in and says, wow, is there more? Because here's the white light and my thoughts in it, but there isn't anything else. And then I feel a movement, and I'm in an indigo background with points of light surrounding me. And I intuitively know that these are points of consciousness, whether in body or not. I wasn't sure because I knew I wasn't. But I had the sense they were somehow. Then the voice picks up and says verbatim, these are those that you are to work with in order to facilitate a new world order. It will happen in your lifetime. Know this to be true. Your path will be full of trials and tribulations. Have faith and trust that everything you need will be there at its appointed time. Trust and allow. And then I have another rush of energy, and I'm back in my body taking a gulp of air. Now I keep my eyes closed, and I realize that that same sensation is now in my body. And I just bathed in it for the rest of the album. And then I realized afterwards that, okay, so, and I did a lot of studies and read my first book, I think was the Vedas, trying to figure out what just happened to me and if there was some ancient references to it. Turns out there was. It's a unit of consciousness, is the white light, and we're all divine threads of it that are capable of having what they say, God consciousness. So the second thing that came from that, actually the first thing, was that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, becoming aware. And that's what I took from that immediate experience without any research or study beyond it, just the fact that I acquiesced to being willing to die for what I believed in the terms of cosmic consciousness. So essentially that whole experience was that. Then bringing it back into my body made it real, practical, pragmatic, and as well as, okay, what do I do with this, right? And having this kind of profound rite of passage as 18 normally doesn't happen. And so I talked to a lot of people, including my parents. They had me see a psychiatrist, visited him 3 times or more than that. But after the 3rd visit, he says, you're not crazy. You've had a spiritual awakening from all the signs and from everything. And he only asked a few questions. He just listened for 3 sessions. And he said, most people at 18, I don't know why it happens so early. Most people don't go through it to their mid-40s, if they ever do. And so I took that in. And of course, in my mid-40s, I realized, oh, empty nesting, career stagnation, all that kind of stuff. And it makes sense that, okay, there's nothing, I need something new in my life, which gives people the opportunity to go within and start seeking. So from that point, I had been just asking for opportunities to learn, to grow, to know, to understand how this all works, right? How does this cosmic consciousness in the physical form then participate in the world in something that's practical and pragmatic? And so I went through the aerospace industry, the events industry, education. I went to high school for almost a decade. In the aerospace industry, I ran a $7 million a month production desk that I was at or above goal every month. Teaching, I had wonderful opportunities. I taught special ed for a while, built multiple intelligence learning centers at one of the charter schools that I taught at, wrote a business plan called Spectrum Academy for a model school/village focused on holistic education, which means body, mind, spirit, and planet. And then that was in the early 2000s. Then I started doing partnering workshops for building road and bridge construction. And so I had meetings with stakeholders, could be 20. I think my largest one was 80 for a $500 million project. And my job was to get them all on the same page and working together effectively before the first shovel was turned. So that was a real wonderful experience for me. Then I also simultaneously started a transformational coaching business. I'd gotten some certification, and I also had a master's degree in business, or I had an MBA and a master's in organizational management. So that gave me a little more heads up than most of the coaches in being able to address needs in clients. And then I started building websites, writing books, and I've got 29 titles on Amazon now. So I'm kind of a prolific writer, I guess, in that short amount of time. And then, and I did a TV show starting in 1990 called One World with similar interviews like this, only more to the point of what prompted you to do what you're doing from both inner and outer perspectives. What fears did you encounter? How did you overcome them? And how do you see that fitting into the common human experience around you? Then in 27, so I also was married, had 4 kids, got divorced in 88. And then in 2016, I met a wonderful woman at her Kundalini yoga teacher training graduation, who was from St. Petersburg, Russia, who's now my wife. And we've had a wonderful life together, part of which in April of 21, she comes to me, knowing of my old show. She comes to me and says, you know, you really ought to start talking to people again. You got stuff to say and people like you. And so I'm like, sweet, because I know, you know, this was a labor of love. And in June of 21, I launched One World in a New World. And I'm interviewing people on their inner experience, how they found it, whatever time of life they did, how they made that practical, and how they put that into their work and environment and relationships. And we just passed 10,000 subscribers. So I'm really happy with that in just over 2 years.
That's
now, so the one last thing about that is during one of my conversations, I was talking to a local lawyer who's a federal defense attorney, and he tells me he just started a global peace movement. Well, gosh, that just went, you know, resonated like everything. And his office is only 3 minutes away from my home. So we connected, had lunch. I offered that I have skills for executive director if he needs one. And we were just focusing on trying to start an Arizona chapter because they had an executive director. That was in February. In March, he calls me up and said, hey, Zen, would you be willing to work with a woman in Hawaii that would also like to step up as an executive director? And I'm like, masculine, feminine leadership team. This is perfect, Mark. I'd love to. He said, well, I want to make sure that you guys can get along, right? So we had a few Zoom conferences and found out, yeah, we've got tremendously compatible and complementary skill sets. And so we jumped in, and now we're in process of revamping it. We just finished a style guide, and now we're revamping the website to be more compatible with our voice and tone. And it's been a journey, but I'm really excited about the opportunities and the things that are happening in the process of that. And the last thing is a dear friend of 35 years reached out to me a few months ago, and he's been working on the sonification of plants, which what that means is through sound, he opens up the stigmata on the plants so that they absorb more nutrients and less fertilizer, less water, and they produce exponentially more produce and fruit. So the objective is to feed the world. And so we're just getting ready to put together a leadership team for this and take it to market. And it's just, I'm so excited. It's 66 now, right? It's finally, I feel like I'm a young kid again with all this opportunity in front of me, and it just feels awesome.
That's the wonderful thing about it. You know, we go through our stagnant times in our life and think that, well, what are we doing, etc. Then we start meeting different people. Are you finding as you've gotten older, there's more and more people that you're meeting that have similar mindsets, and they might be doing something different, but they really connect?
I do. And the reason why is frequency based, to be honest. You know, I had a conversation with Dr. Irvin Laszlo, and we were talking about quantum physics. And I'd mentioned that, you know, quantum physics says we're 99% space and 1% material. And he said, I would say we're 100% energy, which is true with what we know about quantum physics. There really is no physicality. It's all these little, you know, strings of energy. And it's how they resonate, how the frequencies that attract or repel. Same thing with people, right? The law of attraction on steroids, really, is that how we think and feel, we begin to resonate there. And if we're there for long enough without the distractions, then we start to attract others like us. And we meet them in very serendipitous and synchronistic ways. Now it's up to us then to recognize that synchronicity, be aware enough that it's happening, and then engage it somehow. And it could be as little as going into a room and catching somebody's eye on the other side of the room instantly. Well, that's a connection that you need to explore, or that I need to explore. So I learned that. And man, I'm this gregarious kid anyway. So this just gives me more opportunity, right? Well, be careful when you got me and a few others like me in a room, man. We can wreak havoc.
Well, that's what it comes down to. And I know that some people are, you know, concerned about what they actually know. It's more what I don't know that interests me the most, learning new things. But
curiosity.
Exactly. If you don't have that curiosity in your life, you're virtually stagnant.
Oh yeah.
Any way to grow.
Dennis Patako, who's a publisher for 360, Biz Catalyst 360, which is a wonderful website, bizcatalyst360.com, over almost 30,000 articles. No advertising. So they're not, and they're all about reimagineering humanity. But Dennis says, you know, he says, I have a radical curiosity and I ask questions that nobody else does. Just because I've been curious my entire life, and I've got a lot of things that I think I know, and maybe a little bit of wisdom. However, I still have that insatiable curiosity to know others, to know more about them, to know what makes them tick, how they think, and to see how we can find some way to work together towards something that means more to others.
It's like with all the conversations I've had in here with different people, the one thing I've recognized amongst everybody, because I always look for the similarities first before I worry about the differences. Because when people focus on the differences,
that's all you see.
They keep away from each other. This is where, when they don't understand somebody, this is when you have your bullying and other things coming up and misunderstandings. But all the conversations I've had, everybody has had a similar thread, and that was to feel that they belong, that they contribute, that they're valued, etc. And once you see that connection to the similarity, then you can look at the differences with a completely different mindset, because it's not something completely foreign to you. Now there's a similarity, there's a connection of some form, which is why I loved it when you said that the comment you were told was that, or the comment that was made to you was that we are 100% energy, as opposed to just looking at, you know, we're 99% space and 1% material or substance. But looking at the 100% energy, then we've got a similarity. It gives us a starting point.
Absolutely. And this similarity then, so the New World Order, as it was mentioned to me, I know that probably triggered some of your listeners. This is not anything to do with any outer activity. This is a core-based genetic spiritual combination that's emerging in humanity in its natural order in our own evolutionary process to get us to learn how to work together better, ultimately achieving harmony among people and planet. Now, is that bliss? No. No, harmony comes from recognizing the patterns in chaos and learning how to work with them, or what we believe to be chaos, which is usually something we're unfamiliar with initially until we peer deeper and have those curious questions, right, to reveal the patterns that are in it. Could be behavior, could be something else, could be music. But to be able to identify those and then be able to acquiesce to them in some cases, because you have to move into it, you can't resist it because it's all part of what is, then it makes a much better dance in the reality of life. And you feel like you're listening to good music. What I find is that in that there's this sense of awe that you begin to live in almost constantly, because there's always this renewal of things that are happening and being presented, and this elevation that we go through in our acquisition of knowledge, first of all. And then knowledge is worthless unless you can apply it.
That's it.
Right. So then the wisdom is in applying that knowledge through best practices in our everyday lives. And this is the interesting thing about how there's a whole, I don't know how many people, but there's a bunch of people that believe that the solstice of 2012, winter solstice, was a changing point in humanity. And according to the Mayans, and a friend of mine who actually brought out the Mayan calendar, Jose Arguez, there was an opening in 1987 called the harmonic convergence that kind of opened up a window, and it allowed people the opportunity to escalate their awareness and consciousness. And that's what the apex of the winter solstice in 2012 actually was. Then there's a new beginning, because what do you do with it? Well, you take it everywhere, because what you do anywhere, you do everywhere. So you take this awareness, this consciousness, it goes everywhere you do. And the more present you are, the more exponentiated the size of your aura is. And so that affects others. Well, what does that happen? And this is subtly, this is like without even being consciously aware of it. So this little tickling is going on in the substrated consciousness with everyone around you. And then that spills out. And what's happens over time is everything that doesn't resonate with that new awareness, or that new living awareness, comes to the surface for review. Well, gosh, what's happened in the last 5 years? Right? It's been all this stuff that comes up to the surface, including COVID, which gave us all the opportunity to focus on how can I put it? Focus on the self-obsession on personal hygiene and sequestration, and use that to turn inward. It's behavior mod, right? We affect the outer world or others' behavior with modification protocols. That eventually seeps inward. Now, many people, not all, but many people took that to heart, and they made different choices to how they're going to come out of COVID. And we see all the results of that. Now, what do we do? Right? And so there's this dance that's taking place, a lot of it virtually, and people getting to know each other purposely, and changing their work habits to doing things of purpose and with purpose and passion, and starting to look for their own life purpose, which is kind of where I come in as a transformational coach, right? I help them peel back the onion to find that core essence of what their passion and what they think their purpose might be, and then help create situations around them so that they can embody and engage and step into that new world for them. It's fascinating to watch it happen, even more so, humbling and honoring to be part of that process.
Yeah, well, that's very much a case of it, isn't it? It's interesting, as you said, so many things came up through COVID, and people chose to handle them in different ways. But as you said, all of these things happen for a reason. They become lessons, or something that we can use to actually understand more as we go into the future, and what directions we take. So have you found that, as you said, if we go back in time, there were certain times when there seemed to be a lot more awareness. What are you noticing generally in the world at the moment?
Well, let me give you a specific example. When I was in the aerospace industry in the mid-'80s, I facilitated the bringing in of interpersonal skills classes. And by doing so, I became an enemy of the culture. And so I was outcast. Year and a half after I left the company, I ran into one of the people that I knew there, and they said, "You're not going to believe it. They just instituted interpersonal skills classes plant-wide." So it took 3.5 years to do that. Interpersonal skills classes have turned into emotional intelligence now. And that is kind of ubiquitous in leadership programs and all of those kinds of the agile business, right? The flourishing business, all has to do with how to engage. I just wrote an article on holistic organizational development through servant leadership. And just let that settle for a minute. Right. So what that is takes that mind, body, spirit, planet and allows on an individual and, worker as well as leader view of being a servant leader in that organization, learning how to embrace others across the board with no bias, no prejudice, and just figuring out how can we work together better with common goals and learn each other in the process. So I see that, in answer to your question, I see that happening as a really good sign that this is beginning to take place. It took what Howard Gardner came up with the multiple intelligences and promoted those in 1982. I taught high school from 98 to 2004, and although they were talked about, they weren't implemented anywhere. And then I figured, oh, why not? I had the opportunity. I had full charge of the entire high school curriculum in one classroom. So I figured, wow, I'll just build multiple intelligence learning centers and see how the kids adapt to those and see if that helps in this, cross grade level education and see if that makes a difference. It was huge. So, and that, even that now in the multiple intelligences, it helps for us to realize we have different learning styles and we can't expect others to have the same learning styles we do. Right? You've got to dig in. You got to be curious. Most of those learning styles are observable. You can't test for them. You can test for personality, like Myers-Briggs, or the problem-solving communication preferences, like with the DISC assessments and those kinds of things. Yet there's still that human interaction that can only take place through observation and engagement.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it's a lot of fun, usually.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is to keep the fun attitude towards it, because if you just went back and you said, as you said, when you worked with the aerospace and you introduced something and then it was you virtually ostracized for it, and 3.5 years later, whatever, they end up employing it into what they're doing, that can be quite frustrating. It's almost like you feel that you're always ahead of your time on different things that you're doing. This is where I've been a lot in my life.
But I didn't tell you that here's the other two of the trifecta that happened during that 3-month period when I left the aerospace. My divorce was final, and I got the church tried to expel me based on what my wife had told them about our relationship, which was a complete lie, and basing everything on it. It was really painful, to think that you put your best foot forward in every area of your life, and it's above and beyond what everybody else around you is doing, and you still get cut off at the knees. Well, that just means the universe says, okay, you're done. Right? Just get ready. And man, the next year after that happened was so glorious. The picture behind me was part of that. I was at a spiritual retreat with a bunch of people at a lake in northern Arizona, and I had an experience of the guy that, you know, we know as Jesus, that came to me during the process, asked to speak through me to the rest of the group. They even saw him. Now here's the difference. Okay. We live half inside and half outside. We're usually bereft of the inside because we don't know how to handle it. We don't know how to bridge the inner world with the outer world. So I've been fairly good at that because of the education, training, tutelage, whatever you want to call it, right? Since a kid. So I'm really comfortable with that. Not many are, because we don't know how to interpret what's going on inside of us, the visuals, the sensations, all that kind of stuff. Well, in this situation, there were a few with the group who could see with their eyes closed and witnessed him as well. So that was a relief to me, because when he started speaking, the first sentence was, "Know that I'm with you always." The second was, "This one's fear is great." And at that point, I'm like, "What you talking about, Willis?" And we had a sidebar, and he says to me, "Your fears are the same as mine were," which took me back to that experience at 18, right? That's what my fear is can I fulfill my divine calling? And I know I can, and it's in process now. COVID was also part of that trigger that's going to allow it to now emerge, because people are seeking, and what they are seeking is also seeking them.
That's it.
That's their higher self, as Laszlo calls it, right? It's all part of that inner voice, right? That your whole being is seeking to be present in you. How much of it are you going to let out?
Yeah, always comes back to the things that happen around us, our attitude to them, or how we take them, whether we focus on the negative side of things or the positive side, how we're going to take it to the next step, because everything that happens to us in our life is a learning experience. But it comes down to the big question is, what do we learn from it at the time?
Yeah, it could be oops, or I thought I did. Right? Because oftentimes we're so stinking self-deprecating. 70,000 thoughts go on in our head a day, and probably 50,000 of those are self-deprecating.
Yep.
So how do we do that? Well, because it's unconscious. That's the patterns, right? This is what we've learned. This is what we repeat, because this is what we've learned.
Yeah.
So becoming aware of that, managing your mind, being able to, one of the techniques I use is just putting your fingertips together, deepening your breathing, and trying to feel your heart beat your fingertips. Well, when you do, what has just happened? You're out of your head. You're feeling.
That's it.
Now, if you can stick with that and get your whole body pulsing over time, then you can begin to be aware of your heartbeat and just really center in that, right? Because the breathing, the heartbeat are two things that aspiring, right? Inspiring. These are things that drive us, right? That without, we wouldn't have our physical bodies any longer. We'd still be conscious. We wouldn't die, but we'd be in a different place, in a different form. And I love this physical body. I want to be here for a while. I want to see this thing through and watch all the happiness that's a result of it.
Very much being involved in the changes that are made. So tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing now and where you see that going.
Oh gosh, because there's several, I'm a guy that likes multiple things going on simultaneously because I can handle it. That was what I was taught early on in the aerospace industry. I had 800 part numbers I was responsible for, and all of them had lead times from 6 months to 2.5 years. Right. So it was all this monitoring and just making sure stuff happened. So that taught me a lot. It also taught me about getting on people's priority lists, because I was one of 35 people in the department who had no authority to get anything done. It just was our ability to convince others to do what we needed them to do. And so that also, I learned how to get to the top of people's priority list just by treating them like I like to be treated. It's amazing how the golden rule works, which is what the interpersonal skills classes were designed to do, right? Let's get back to the golden rule. When you treat others how you want to be treated, and unless you really want to be beat up and, manipulated or, mangled or whatever, which I find hard to believe that anybody would like that, then love and be loved, right? That's really the core of what we're after in such a simple fashion. Well, how does that play out? Depends on you.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, because when I look at things, I know that, yes, as we say, treat others as we would have them treat us. And then I put on top of that, communicate with others as they would have us communicate with them. So we're treating them with the same respect that we'd like to receive, but also communicating with them in the way that they understand because of the way they want to be spoken to. So in other words, tuning our transmitter into their receiver.
And don't be afraid of the pause button. Right? We are so inundated with you got to respond immediately. That's a killer for conversation, especially if you bring bias into it. You don't have a time to think about what your comment's going to do to the other person in whatever way. They may have the same bias, but they probably not. And they may take offense at it, not knowing where you're coming from with it. So put it on pause. And then this is one of James Redfield's insights in the Celestine Prophecy. I think it's the third insight. Don't speak until you feel the inner prompting to do so. Again, being often bereft of that inner training, we don't know how to hit the pause button, let alone remain silent until those best words bubble up. And just giving that moment of introspection can be so phenomenally beneficial in the communication with the person in front of you or the group.
We're saying that it's a matter of listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond.
Yep, that's I believe Stephen Covey's fifth habit, I think.
And it's always been a case of ask every question you can possibly think of, and then ask one more. And the last one is always, from what you've been telling me, this is what I understand. Have I got it right? And at that point,
and that last question,
that last
am I hearing you?
important.
Have I got it right? Right. You got to have that in order to seal the deal on the communication that's just taken place.
That's it. And if you've got it right, then great. You got rapport. You understand that you're being listening to them and everything else. If you haven't got it right, there's something that you missed. That's a win as well, because you're now into a deeper conversation. Where we've been asking questions before, now it's a conversation about that, which takes you to a deeper level again.
Speaking of questions and conversations, I remember that I didn't answer the last one. I gave you some prep with the aerospace industry example and my ability to handle multiple tasks at once. So there's several things on my plate right now. The agrisonics, which is the sonification of plants that I mentioned. There's a global peace movement. So it's moving at its own pace. Everything, it's like I was told in my vision that everything will be there at its appointed time. Then the trick is to learn how to allow it to flow and don't push and pull it, because that will cause distractions and disturbance. You don't want that. It's like Goldratt stuff on the bottlenecks and the goal, right? Companies, you look for the bottlenecks. Well, you want to eliminate those bottlenecks, so you got flow. Don't push or pull, just be in flow. And in that, so there's sonification, the global peace movement, my coaching business. My wife has a piano studio that we're getting ready to expand that into a music school. We just had a conversation with a gentleman that's had a music studio production well, not just music, television, and podcast production facility for about 10 years, and he's wanting to expand. And so we're looking at bringing in the generational gap differences and working on putting older people that know the business, that have understanding, with the younger people that know the technology, and bridging those gaps with a building of character in each. So, these kind of opportunities are just, they're beginning to fall in my lap, which is what I had hoped would happen and kept my nose to the grindstone and doing the work, my own personal work, in order to be able for those to happen. Oh, and let's don't forget the podcast too, One World, a New World.
Excellent.
Those are exciting conversations too.
It's fantastic. Yeah, because as you mentioned before, just going back to a point where you said about everything has within its own time, etc.
Mm-hmm.
We've got something we're really focused on. That's all we can see. So nothing else exists. And we want that to happen by a certain time. But we don't stop and think. Well, I know I'll talk about me. I know I haven't stopped and thought, well, how does that fit in with what everybody else is doing?
Right.
There's timing for everything in connection with everything else. Like the hashtag that we have on the Campfire Project is the hashtag we together, because only together can we actually solve the problems. We can't do it on our own. It's the same thing with the things that I want to create. Yeah, I get the feelings I had. I mean, last night thinking, I really want this stuff to be further forward. But
yeah,
is everybody else ready for that yet?
Right. And
you're right.
That's the time, right?
Hmm.
So to be able to recognize it, and part of being a coach and knowing what I do is once we set the goal, the vision, or the mission for individually or the organization, then we break it back and say, okay, now what's it going to take to get there? What are the incremental steps, backing it up? Standard entrepreneurial, start with the end in mind and back it up. Those kinds of things. Find people who've gone down the road before you, ask them questions of how they got there. That's a way to truncate timeframes. And those kind of people will say, hey, you want to remember that your priority is not necessarily everybody else's. So you got to prepare for that. And both my degrees, it was brought up that everything that you think you can do in a certain amount of time, it's going to take you 3 times longer. And there's actually a quadratic formula that's been used in corporations for decades that prove that. So the rule of thumb, it's going to take you 3 times longer. So plan for that. What else can you do while you're waiting? Right? There are so many ancillary items that when you see things from that perspective, you can ask questions. Okay, what am I missing? What else do I need to do? Who else do I need to have on my team? Where else might I be able to get better advice? All of those kinds of things, because you got the time now. You don't feel so stressed because you're trying to get this shit done. Right?
Yeah, one of the other things is the other things that you might look at, well, I can do this. It seems to be totally disconnected to the one thing that you've been wanting to get done. But then down the track, you find that they just come back together.
Yep.
So there's a lot that we don't see because we haven't got the full picture. Because
Very true.
We're not in that position to ever see the full picture. The picture starts to unfold as we go along over time, and we see more as it comes together.
Sure. And you will, that's part of the inner development, right? Because these things all have frequencies. They're all integrated. There's all a master plan that only wants the best for you. You just have to listen better, when you're asking questions to get those responses, and then follow the response. It may, like you said, it may make no sense whatsoever. The prompting that you feel that you need to go do something or look into something. Follow that. That's a subtle impression. One of the other things I've learned from indigenous philosophy, it's called a three-brain system. And this came from the folks not too far from you. I'm not sure I know it was the Aborigines, might have been the Maori, but the first brain's the gut, intuition, subtle impressions. Because why? Because you're connected to the vibrations there. There's even medical proof now that there's all kinds of neurosensors there. Heart's the second brain. That's where you decide, oh, is this resonant, not resonant? It's kind of a Taoist thing. Is it desirable or undesirable? Right? And then based on that, then you move up to the third brain, which is the processing unit, and you can make choices as to what to do about it. Better choices because you're not reacting at that point.
Yeah. Well, if we're coming from that brain, first of all, we've got problems. But if we come from the other direction,
we have, we live from the shoulders up. We think and shove everything down into our bodies, which are an instrument we haven't learned how to tune yet, let alone play in concert. And then we wonder why we have dis-ease.
That's it.
pretty cool stuff. I mean, you know, I love this conversation and how you've triggered that I can share this in such a truncated amount of time.
That's brilliant. So for people to be able to find more out about you, where's the best place they can find you?
Oh, the best place would be zenbenefiel.com. There's a bunch of colored buttons across the top that are, each one of them are rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got several things available there. The podcast on YouTube, One World in a New World, and my coaching site, which is bethedream.com. And interesting story about that. I was in the throes of the interpersonal skills classes thing in the aerospace industry. In 1988, I got the business name registered, Be the Dream. My goal, bridge spiritual and business best practices. So I've been at that for quite some time and gotten a little better over the years.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'd like to continue these conversations. I know that from the people who are listening, there'll be a lot of questions that they will have, but there's also a lot of people who've similar mindsets. So, you know, we'd love to have some more panel discussions around this, I think.
Yeah, and I'm totally
Delve
open
deeper.
to discussions. I've got a calendar link on my coaching site, bethedream.com, free consultation for a half hour. Just, you know, we can chat. You got questions, I'm totally open. And if it goes longer than that, I'm okay with that too. I'm not a guy that's going to cut you off at 30 minutes unless I got something else coming up.
Yeah, that's it. And we'll have to get you into the panel discussions that we run in here as well. So we can have some very meaty conversations in there, and usually about 4 of us on screen together, which
sounds wonderful.
an hour or so, which works quite well.
That sounds wonderful. I'd love to do that.
I'll put you on the list then, and I'll be advertising. We do have a couple running early next month, and then I'll be doing some more. I've got a couple of projects I'm in the middle of, and once they're done, we'll be back into the panel discussions. We've just actually run all the old ones we've done before. We're putting those up one at a day, and it was close to 200 panel discussions that we reran. So
that's a lot.
I want to keep adding to those.
Bow to you for just being able to do those, Alan. That's phenomenal.
We originally started with the men that came in, and we were talking about, once they did the one-on-ones, we talked about things like drugs and alcohol, pornography, masculinity, femininity, etc. When the women then asked to get involved, we included, you know, menstruation, menopause, does size matter in the bedroom, and it's been beautiful. We've had, you know, in one-on-ones and panel discussions, over 600 hours of conversations, and no bigotry, sexism, or racism, and people have always been respectful to everybody else in the conversation. So it's definitely working, because I think everybody wants to have that place where they feel safe.
Oh yeah, now you just have to expand your reach.
That's it.
Right, you got to get more people listening, and those people. And here's the interesting thing about networks, right? It's been so challenging. This is why I see in social media, people are just they're more self-focused, posting, you know, commenting, not really sharing, not doing a whole lot to help others. Right. And so that's the key to this: is caring is sharing.
That's it.
That's the true social currency now, is that comment and share.
That's it. And what we're looking for is more people running their own groups to come into the Campfire Project, share their stories so that we can tell everybody about what they're doing. And it's always been a case of tell your story first so people know who you are. And then we're happy to promote out free of charge to the rest of the world about what you do. By getting those leaders into panel discussions, I know anybody who's running a group usually feels that they've got to be there for everybody else, but they're going to go through tough times, and who do they turn to? Well, if they got to know people from other groups, and people who are running their own groups, they've got peer support as well, which is taking it beyond the all genders, all religions, and all cultures. But
I'm a firm believer and experiencer of that very thing.
Yeah. Anybody that you would like to tell about the Campfire Project, we'd love to have them come in, tell their stories. and see how we can then advocate for each other and help each other, because that's how we make the changes. And then the work that you and I want to do has got more chance of happening sooner, I believe, because more people will be wanting it to happen.
It will happen regardless. We can, with our personal efforts, truncate that time frame. Why? Because time is a measurement in the change of entropy.
Exactly.
That isn't often recognized because we think it's a clock. Experientially, time is a measurement in the change of entropy. What's that mean? Well, the more harmonious you're acting or engaging others, the less time it's going to take for doing what it is you need to do, because everybody's going to be focused, not distracted.
That's right. It all happens on the impact of the results of the time.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, Zen, I'm feeling that I'm, keeping an eye on the time as well, because, we like to keep these to a certain period for everyone to really get engaged.
Hard to do that with me, Alan, honestly.
And I think the problem with, I use the word problem, but it's not a problem. There's the two of us getting together and talking, we could probably just keep going and going and going.
Oh, yeah, we could.
So we'll just have to come back and do some more one-on-ones, and also get you in the panel discussions as well.
Perfect.
It'll be fantastic. Okay, Zen, well, thanks very much for being here today. And to everybody else who's been listening in today, again, all the contact details for Zen will be in the show notes. Follow him up, have chats, and let us know what you think of the conversations that we're having as well. Anyway,
Alan, it's been such a pleasure. Namaste, and in-law catch, my brother from another mother.
Thank you very much, then. Feelings mutual. And to everybody else, we'll see you on the next campfire. Bye for now.